The scent of lilies hung heavy in the air, mingling with the sharp tang of champagne. But all I could taste was the bitter sting of being forgotten. My name is Abigail Rose Carter, and I'm telling you this story because I need you to hear it, truly hear it, the way you hear a heartbeat in the quiet. Last summer at my niece Clara's wedding, they didn't bother to reserve me a seat. I stood at the back of the reception hall, my heels digging into my feet, my navy blue dress clinging too tightly to a body I'd stopped caring for years ago. The room glittered under crystal chandeliers, their light fracturing across wine glasses and polished silverware. Laughter ricocheted off the walls, sharp and relentless, like distant gunfire. Clara, glowing in her white gown, drifted from table to table. Her new husband's arm looped around her waist, his grin wide enough to swallow the world. My sister Patricia presided over the mother's table, her voice cutting through the din, her pearls catching the light like tiny moons. And me, I was a ghost, unseen, unmissed. I'd driven 3 hours to get there, the flat Ohio roads stretching endlessly before me, my old Buick rattling, as if it resented the journey as much as I did. The radio had crackled with static, and I'd turned it off, letting the hum of the engine fill the silence. I hadn't wanted to come. Weddings belong to the young, to those still drunk on hope, still weaving dreams from promises. I'd long since outgrown such things, or so I told myself, but Clara had called me a week before, her voice soft, almost pleading. "Aunt Abby, you have to be there. It won't feel right without you." Her words had caught me off guard, a flicker of warmth in a heart I'd trained to stay cold. So I went. I bought a dress, simple and navy, the kind that doesn't beg for attention. I stood before my mirror, practicing a smile that might hide the ache, the years of being the one left out, the one they never quite saw. When I arrived at the venue, a sprawling country club with ivy crawling up its walls, the usher a boy no older than 20. His hair slicked back his suit, too big for his narrow shoulders, barely glanced at me. "Families up front." He muttered, his eyes already sliding to the next guest, a woman in a sequined dress who laughed too loudly. I nodded, clutching my purse, and made my way to the ceremony, my steps slow, deliberate. The pews were packed, the air thick with perfume and anticipation. I found a spot near the back, standing against a pillar, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles whitened. Clara walked down the aisle, her veil trailing like a whisper, and I felt a pang, not jealousy, but something softer, sadder. I remembered her as a child, tugging at my sleeve, asking me to read her stories. Now she was someone else's story, and I was just a shadow at the edge of it. After the vows, the crowd spilled into the reception hall, a cavernous space with tall windows and tables draped in white linen. I lingered near the entrance, waiting for someone to call my name, to wave me over, to say, "Abby, you're with us." No one did. Patricia caught my eye across the room, her lips curving into that practiced half-smile she's wielded like a blade since we were girls. It said, "Oh, Abigail, still here, still you." I smiled back, my lips tight, because what else was there to do? I'd learned long ago that fighting her only made the cuts deeper. The tables were set with name cards, each one written in elegant gold script, like a promise of belonging. I walked the rows, my heart sinking, with every step my fingers brushing the edges of the cards, as if touching them might make my name appear. Nothing. Not at the family table where Patricia sat laughing with Claire's new in-laws. Not at the cousins' table where my nephews argued over the last dinner roll. Not even at the corner table where distant relatives with mothball-scented coats whispered to each other. I stood there, my face burning the room, tilting slightly. A waitress, her arms laden with a tray of champagne flutes, paused beside me. "Ma'am, you okay?" She asked, her voice kind, but rushed, her eyes darting to the next table. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Just looking for my place." I said the words barely audible. I found refuge at the bar, perched on a stool that wobbled under my weight, my purse resting on my lap like a shield. I ordered a glass of water, not trusting myself with anything stronger. The bartender, a man with tired eyes and a quick smile, slid it toward me without a word. Around me, the party roared to life. Clara's friends, all in their 20s, formed a circle on the dance floor, their laughter sharp and bright, their dresses flashing like fireflies. My brother-in-law Tom stood to give a toast, his voice booming about family and love, each word landing like a stone in my chest. I stared at the ice melting in my glass, counting the bubbles as they rose and burst, trying to anchor myself against the tide of the room. Then came the moment that carved itself into me, a wound I'd carry long after the night ended. Patricia rose, clinking her glass with a spoon, the sound sharp enough to hush the crowd. To Clara she said, her voice warm commanding, and to all of us who've made this day possible. She listed names: her husband, her son, the in-laws, the caterer, even the florist who'd arranged the lilies. The room nodded, smiled, raised their glasses. My name wasn't spoken, not once, not a whisper, not a nod in my direction. The applause rolled over me, and I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, the weight of 30 years pressing down, 30 years of family dinners, where I was the afterthought, the one they called poor Abby, the one they pitied when they thought I wasn't listening. She never married, they'd murmur, never amounted to much. I wanted to stand to scream that I wasn't nothing, that I'd lived a life they couldn't begin to fathom. I wanted to tell them about the nights I hadn't slept, the choices I'd made, the weight of secrets I carried, like stones in my bones. But I didn't. I stayed silent, my lips pressed into a thin line, my heart a clenched fist. Silence was my armor, my refuge. It always had been. Then I heard it, a voice behind me, low and venomous, slicing through the noise. God, Abby, you look like you're at a funeral. It was my cousin Lorraine, her lipstick too red, her eyes glinting with the cruel amusement she's carried since we were children. She leaned closer, her perfume choking the air between us. What, no +1, not even a date. Oh, honey, you're too much. A few people nearby turned, their laughter bubbling up their eyes, pinning me like needles. I felt the heat climb my neck, the room shrinking around me. I wanted to vanish, to dissolve into the shadows. Instead, I forced a smile, tight and brittle, and said, "It's a beautiful wedding, Lorraine." My voice was steady, but inside something cracked. She laughed again, louder, and sauntered away, her heels clicking like a countdown. I tell you this not for pity, but because it's the truth. That moment, standing alone in a room full of people who should have known me, who should have loved me, broke something deep inside. But it also stirred something awake, something I'd buried long ago. I didn't know then that the night wasn't over, that the universe has a way of righting wrongs, of balancing scales. I didn't know a man in a Navy uniform, stars gleaming on his shoulders, would walk through those doors and turn their laughter to silence. If you're still here, if this story resonates with you, please hit that subscribe button. This isn't just my story. It's for anyone who's ever felt invisible, who's carried a truth no one else could see. There's more to tell, and I promise it's worth hearing. Your support means the world, and it keeps this channel alive for stories like this one. I stayed at the bar, my fingers tracing the rim of my glass, counting the seconds until I could slip away unnoticed. The band shifted to a slow song, and couples swayed on the dance floor, their faces soft, with joy, their hands entwined. I watched them, and for a fleeting moment I let myself remember, not the wedding, not Lorraine's venom, not the sting of being forgotten, but another time, another place. A room not so different from this one, where people stood when I entered, where my voice carried weight, where my name meant something. I could still feel the crispness of the uniform against my skin, the weight of a badge in my hand, the quiet power of a room holding its breath for my words. But that was another life, one I'd buried deep, locked away, where no one could find it. The oaths I'd taken, the secrets I'd sworn to keep, they left no room for pride, for explanations, for anything but silence. So I sat there, a woman no one saw, no one needed, and I waited for the night to end. The ice in my glass melted into nothing, and I wondered not for the first time if I had too. The band played on their notes, weaving through the chatter, but I was somewhere else. My fingers gripped the edge of the bar, the wood cool and smooth under my palms, grounding me as my mind slipped back to a life I hadn't let myself touch in years. My name is Abigail Rose Carter, and I'm telling you this because it's time you knew the weight of what I've carried. That night at Clara's wedding, with Lorraine's laughter still stinging and the room spinning with joy I couldn't reach, I remembered who I used to be. Not the woman they pitied, not poor Abby, but someone else, someone who walked through fire and came out steel. It was 1998, and I was 23, standing on a pier in Norfolk, Virginia, the salt air biting my cheeks. The Navy had called me, not with fanfare, but with a letter crisp and official, summoning me to a world I barely understood. I'd grown up in Ohio, in a town where ambition was a whisper and dreams were for other people. My father had been a mechanic, my mother a seamstress. They loved me, but they didn't know what to do with a daughter who read books on cryptography and stared at the stars like they held secrets. When I told them I'd enlisted, my mother cried, and my father said, "Abby, you're chasing ghosts." But I went anyway, my suitcase packed with more hope than sense. Basic training broke me open. The days were endless sprints at dawn drills, under a sun that didn't forgive nights where sleep was a rumor. My body ached, my hands blistered, but I learned to keep my head down and my heart quiet. The instructors shouted their voices like thunder, and I absorbed every word, every command. I wasn't the strongest or the fastest, but I was relentless. I memorized codes, studied maps, listened when others spoke too loud. By the time I graduated, they saw at the spark the thing that set me apart. They pulled me aside one evening, a commander with eyes like slate, and said, "Carter, you're not here to march in parades. You're here for something bigger." That's when they sent me to intelligence school, a place that didn't exist on any map I'd ever seen. The building was gray, nondescript, tucked behind a chain-link fence that hummed with electricity. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and ozone, and the rooms were filled with people who spoke in whispers. They taught me things I can't repeat, even now: how to read patterns in chaos, how to listen to silences, how to become a shadow. I learned to live with secrets, to carry them like stones in my chest. I was good at it, better than I expected. By 25, I was on my first assignment, a classified operation I can only describe as a chess game played in the dark. I didn't pull triggers or storm beaches, but I moved pieces, information, names, coordinates that changed the board. There was a night one I'll never shake in a safe house somewhere I won't name. The walls were thin, the air thick with cigarette smoke. I sat at a table with 3 others, my hands steady, as I decoded a transmission that could have tipped a balance I didn't fully understand. The man across from me, a Marine with scars like a map, watched me work. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "Carter, you're a goddamn ghost. They'll never see you coming." I didn't smile. I didn't need to. For the first time, I felt like I belonged not to a family, not to a town, but to something larger, something that mattered. But belonging came at a cost. The years piled up, and so did the absences. I missed birthdays, Christmases, my father's funeral. When I came home, my family looked at me like a stranger. Patricia would ask, "Where have you been, Abby?" And I'd say, "Work," because the truth was locked behind oaths I couldn't break. She'd roll her eyes, call me secretive, and turn away. I wanted to tell her about the nights I didn't sleep, the lives that depended on my silence, but I couldn't. So I let her think I was ordinary, let them all think it. It was easier that way. Back at the wedding, the memory faded, and the noise of the reception crashed over me. I blinked my eyes stinging and took a sip of water to steady myself. The glass was cold, the ice long gone. I wondered if that's what I'd become, something melted, something used up. Sometimes I forgot I was ever anything but forgotten. The woman who'd walked through that safe house, who'd held secrets that could have shattered nations, felt like a dream I'd borrowed. But she was still there, buried deep, waiting. I could feel her in the way my spine stayed straight, the way my hands didn't tremble even now. I looked around the room at the faces I'd known all my life. Patricia laughing too loud, Tom red-faced from wine, Lorraine whispering to someone new. They didn't know me, they never had. And I'd let them believe I was nothing because the truth was too heavy, too dangerous. The oaths I'd taken didn't end when I left the Navy. They followed me like shadows I couldn't outrun. Trauma, too, had its grip nights when I woke, gasping, my heart racing from dreams I couldn't share. I'd built a life around silence, around being the woman they expected, quiet, unremarkable, alone. But alone wasn't empty. Alone was where I kept her, the woman I'd been, the one who'd stood in rooms where decisions shaped the world. I carried her in my bones, in the way I noticed exits, in the way I read a room without trying. At the bar, I watched the crowd, my eyes catching details. Others missed the waiter who limped slightly, the woman who checked her phone too often, the man in the corner who didn't drink. Old habits, ones I couldn't shake. They were all that tethered me to her, to the life I'd left behind. Clara's laughter pulled me back. She was on the dance floor now, her dress swirling as she spun with her husband. I smiled, a real one this time, because I loved her even if she'd forgotten me tonight. I'd come for her, not for them, but the ache remained a bruise that wouldn't fade. I thought of calling it a night slipping out before anyone noticed. My car keys were in my purse, my coat draped over the stool. I could be halfway home by midnight, back to my quiet house, my quiet life. But something held me there, a feeling faint but stubborn, like a signal I couldn't quite decode. I didn't know then that the night was about to shift, that a door would open, and a man with stars on his shoulders would walk through. I didn't know the silence I'd carried for so long was about to break. But I felt it the way you feel a storm before the first rain falls. So I stayed, my hands folded, my heart steady, waiting for what I couldn't yet name. If you're still with me, if this story is stirring something in you, please hit that subscribe button. It's not just about me, it's about the parts of us we hide, the strength we carry when no one's looking. There's more to this, and I promise it's a story you won't forget. I leaned back on the stool, my eyes drifting to the chandelier, above its light, scattering like stars across a night I'd once known. The band played something softer now, a melody that felt like longing. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting it pull me under, letting it carry me back to a time when I was more than a name no one said. In that safe house years ago, I'd finished my work and stepped outside, the air cool against my skin. The sky was endless, the stars sharp and clear. I'd stood there alone and felt the weight of what I'd done. Not pride, not glory, but purpose. I'd mattered even if no one could ever know. Now in this glittering hall, I opened my eyes and felt the distance between then and now. The room spun on without me, and I was still the woman at the bar, the one they didn't see. But I wasn't nothing. I never had been. And deep down, in a place I rarely touched, I knew the truth was waiting just out of sight, like a signal breaking through static, ready to be heard. The reception hall pulsed with life, but I sat at the bar, a still point in a storm of laughter and clinking glasses. My name is Abigail Rose Carter, and I'm telling you this because it's the only way I know to make sense of it. How a single night can unravel years of silence. The ice in my glass was gone, the water warm now, but I held it anyway, my fingers tracing the condensation like a map to nowhere. Clara's wedding spun on, and I was still the woman. No one saw the one they'd written off long ago. But I stayed not because I wanted to, but because leaving felt like surrender, and I'd never been good at giving up. I'd learned to endure long before that night. Endurance was my currency, paid in quiet moments in the spaces where others didn't look. My family had called me Poor Abby for years, their voices dripping with pity or scorn. Poor Abby, still alone, they'd say at Christmas dinners, passing the mashed potatoes, while I sat at the end of the table, Poor Abby, no husband, no kids. They didn't mean it to cut, not always, but it did. Each word was a pebble, and over time, I'd built a wall with them, high enough to keep the world out. I'd smile, nod say I'm fine, and they'd move on. Satisfied that I was exactly what they thought, a spinster, a nobody, a woman who'd missed her chance. But they didn't know the half of it. They didn't know about the nights I'd spent in windowless rooms, decoding messages that could have changed the course of wars. They didn't know about the weight of a clearance level that meant I couldn't even tell my mother where I was going. They saw the Abigail who came home with tired eyes and vague answers, the one who'd traded her youth for something they couldn't name. To them, I was a disappointment, a cautionary tale. To me, I was a vault locked tight holding secrets I'd sworn to protect. That night, as the band struck up a lively tune, I watched the room with the same quiet attention I'd once given to briefings. Patricia was at the center of it all. Her laughter too loud, her hands waving as she told a story to a cluster of guests. She'd always been the sun, pulling everyone into her orbit. I was the moon-cold and distant reflecting light I didn't own. She'd never understood why I didn't fight for attention, why I didn't claw my way into her spotlight. Once, years ago, she'd cornered me in her kitchen wineglass in hand and said, "Abby, why don't you do something you're wasting your life?" I'd wanted to tell her then about the missions, the sacrifices, the lives I'd helped save. But the words were chained to my oaths, so I'd said nothing, and she'd walked away, shaking her head. Now at the wedding, I saw that same look in her eyes when she glanced my way, a flicker of pity, maybe disgust. I looked down at my hands, the faint scars on my knuckles. From years I couldn't share. I'd been called worse than spinster. I'd been called burden by my cousin Lorraine, who'd once told me at a family reunion that I was taking up space by staying in our parents' old house. "Sell it, Abby," she'd said, her voice sharp. "Move on. Nobody needs you here." I'd smiled then, too, because smiling was easier than explaining why I stayed, why that house with its creaking floors and faded wallpaper was the only place I could breathe. But I wasn't always silent. There were moments, small ones, where I let the world see me. Like when Clara was 10, and I taught her how to fold a paper crane, my fingers steady, as I showed her the creases. Or when I helped my neighbor Mrs. Dawson carry her groceries, listening to her stories about her late husband, even though I had my own ghosts to carry. I gave what I could, kindness, time, a listening ear, because it was all I had left to offer. They didn't know the woman who'd stood in briefing rooms, who'd made decisions that echoed across continents. They knew the Abigail who showed up, who stayed, who endured. At the reception, the younger women were the loudest, their voices carrying over the music. Clara's friends, in their sleek dresses and high heels, talked about their careers, their fiancés, their plans. One of them, a girl with red curls and a laugh, like a belle, stood near the bar. Her friends gathered around her. "I'm up for a promotion," she said, her voice bright. "VP by 30, can you believe it?" They cheered, clinking their glasses, and I felt a pang, not envy, but recognition. I'd been that age once, full of fire, certain I could shape the world. But my victories were classified, my promotions marked by a nod in a locked room, not champagne toasts. I didn't begrudge her. I just wished for a moment that someone had seen me the way they saw her. Lorraine passed by again, her arm linked with a man I didn't recognize. She caught my eye and smirked, leaning in to whisper something to him. They both laughed, and I knew it was about me. I could have stood up, could have said something sharp, but I didn't. I sipped my water, my face calm, my heart a drumbeat I ignored. I'd faced worse than Lorraine: interrogations, betrayals, moments where a single word could have cost lives. Her cruelty was nothing, just noise, but it still hurt the way a splinter does, small but persistent. I thought about leaving again. My purse was on the bar, my keys inside the promise of my quiet house waiting. I could slip out, drive through the night, let the road swallow this ache. But Clara's face flashed in my mind, her smile when she'd called me, her voice saying, "It won't feel right without you." I stayed for her, even if she hadn't noticed me tonight. I stayed because love, even unreturned, was heavier than pride. The band slowed, and a new song began, something wistful that made the air feel softer. I watched the couples on the dance floor, their movements gentle, their hands clasped like they'd never let go. I didn't dance, hadn't in years, but I remembered a night in a different country, a different life when a colleague had pulled me onto a makeshift dance floor in a bar that smelled of diesel and sweat. We'd laughed clumsy and free for the first time in months. That was before the weight of my work settled in, before the secrets became a cage. I wondered what he'd think of me now, this woman at the bar, invisible to her own family. A young man approached one of Claire's friends, his tie loosened, his cheeks flushed. "Hey, you're Claire's aunt, right?" He asked, his voice loud over the music. I nodded, bracing myself. "Man, you must be proud," he said. "She's killing it out there." He gestured to the dance floor where Clara spun radiant. "You got any kids?" he added, casual, not meaning to wound. I shook my head, my smile tight. "No, just Clara," I said, because it was easier than the truth. He nodded already, turning away, his attention caught by someone else. I was used to it, the way people drifted past me, their interest fleeting. But each time it left a mark, a reminder of how small I'd become in their eyes. I looked at my reflection in the bar's mirrored back wall, distorted by bottles and glassware. My hair was still dark, though gray, threaded through it, now pulled back in a simple bun. My eyes were the same sharp, steady, the eyes of a woman who'd seen too much to flinch. But the lines around them, the weariness in my jaw, told a different story. I was 48, and the world had decided I was done past my prime, past my purpose. They were wrong, but I let them believe it. It was safer that way. If you're still listening, if this resonates with you, please hit that subscribe button. This story isn't just mine, it's for anyone who's been overlooked, who's carried a weight no one else could see. There's more to come, and I promise it's a truth worth hearing. I set my glass down, my fingers steady, and scanned the room again. The night was winding down, the energy softening, but something kept me there, a pull faint but undeniable, like a compass needle twitching north. I didn't know then that the door would soon open, that a man in a Navy uniform would step through and call my name. I didn't know the silence I'd worn like armor was about to shatter. But I felt it deep in my bones, and I waited, as I always had, for what was coming. The reception hall hummed with a softer rhythm, now the band easing into a ballad that made the air feel heavy, like a sigh held too long. My name is Abigail Rose Carter, and I'm telling you this because it's the only way I can carry the truth without breaking. That night at Claire's wedding, I sat at the bar, my hands still my heart, a quiet drumbeat against the noise. I'd almost left my keys were in my purse, my coat draped over the stool, the promise of my silent house pulling me like a tide. But I stayed tethered by something I couldn't name, a stubborn thread of hope or duty, or maybe just the weight of Claire's voice, saying it won't feel right without you. So I stayed, and the night turned the way nights do, when the world decides it's time to show you something new. I hadn't wanted to come to this wedding, not really. The invitation had arrived months ago, a cream-colored envelope with gold lettering Claire's name, and her fiancé's intertwined like a vow. I'd stared at it on my kitchen counter, the weight of it heavier than paper should be. Weddings were for families who remembered each other, for people who belonged. I wasn't sure I did anymore. Patricia had called to remind me, her voice clipped, saying, "Abby, don't skip this one. Claire's counting on you." I'd heard the subtext, "Don't embarrass us by staying away." So I'd said yes, bought the dress, driven the 3 hours, all the while telling myself it was for Clara, not for them. But now, standing at the edge of their joy, I wondered if I'd made a mistake. The hall was a spectacle, the kind of place that screamed money and care-vaulted ceilings, chandeliers dripping light tables, draped in linen so white it hurt to look at. The guests matched the setting, their dresses shimmering, their laughter polished. I felt like an interloper, my navy dress too plain, my presence too quiet. I'd found my way to the bar after the ceremony after realizing there was no seat for me, no name card with Abigail Carter in gold script. The humiliation had settled into my bones, familiar but no less sharp. I was used to being overlooked, but tonight it felt deliberate, a message written in my absence. The evening had moved into its formal phase. Now the toasts and dances giving way to a more structured ceremony. Clara's new father-in-law, a man with a booming voice and a suit that cost more than my car, had announced a special moment to honor the family. The crowd hushed, turning toward the head table where Clara and her husband sat, their hands clasped, their smiles bright. I stayed where I was, my back to the bar, my eyes on the scene unfolding. A microphone was passed to Patricia, who stood, her pearls gleaming, her face alight with pride. She began to speak, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd always known her place. "We're here to celebrate not just Clara and Michael," she said, gesturing to the couple, "but the family that brought them together. The ones who've supported them, loved them, made this day possible." She listed names, her husband Tom, who nodded solemnly, her son David, who grinned from the cousins' table, the in-laws who beamed like they'd won a prize. She thanked the planner, the caterer, even the photographer. The room nodded along, clapping at the right moments, their faces warm with agreement. My name didn't come up. Not a syllable, not a glance in my direction. I felt the omission like a slap, though I kept my face. Still, my hands folded in my lap. I'd expected it, hadn't I? But expecting pain doesn't make it hurt less. The crowd's applause faded, and the band struck up again, but the mood had shifted. People were moving, rearranging themselves for the next part of the evening. A presentation, something about honoring the community, the family, the ties that bound them. I didn't catch the details. My mind was elsewhere, tangled in the ache of being erased. I thought about slipping out now while everyone was distracted. I could be in my car in 5 minutes, the road stretching dark and quiet before me. But my feet didn't move. I stayed pinned by that same stubborn feeling, the one that had kept me here through Lorraine's venom and Patricia's neglect. That's when I saw her, Lorraine, weaving through the crowd, her red lipstick stark against her smile. She was heading my way. Her eyes locked on me, and I braced myself. She stopped a few feet from the bar, her hands on her hips, her voice loud enough to carry. "Abby, you're still here," she said, her tone mock surprised. "I thought you'd have snuck off by now. This must be torture for you." A few heads turned, their laughter soft but cutting. I felt the heat climb my neck, but I met her gaze. My smile practiced unyielding. "It's Clara's day," I said simply. "I'm here for her." Lorraine's eyes narrowed, like she'd expected a fight, and was disappointed. She shrugged, turning away, but not before muttering, "Such a saint," loud enough for the people nearby to hear. They chuckled, and I felt their eyes on me, weighing, dismissing. I wanted to stand, to say something that would silence her, but I didn't. I'd learned long ago that words were dangerous, that silence was safer. In my other life, the one I kept locked away, I'd used silence like a weapon, letting others fill it with their assumptions, while I watched, waited, planned. Here it was, my shield, the only thing keeping me from unraveling. I sipped my water, the glass cold against my lips, and let the moment pass. The presentation began, and the room's attention shifted to a small stage at the front, where Clara's father-in-law stood again, holding a plaque. He spoke about legacy, about the families who'd built this town, about the strength of their bonds. I listened, but only half-heartedly, my mind drifting to the house. I'd return to the quiet rooms where I could be myself again. I didn't belong here, not in this glittering hall, not with these people who saw me as less than nothing. I was ready to go, my hand already reaching for my purse, when the door at the far end of the hall opened. It was a small thing, that door swinging wide, but it changed the air. Conversations faltered, heads turned. I felt it before I saw it, a shift like the moment before. A storm breaks. I looked up, my hand still on my purse, and saw a man step through. He was tall, his posture rigid, his navy uniform crisp and dark, the stars on his shoulders catching the chandelier's light. An admiral I knew at once, the kind of man who commanded rooms without speaking. Behind him were two others also in uniform, their faces serious, their steps measured. The room didn't stop, not entirely, but it slowed the way a crowd does when power enters. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. Something in me, some old instinct honed in rooms, where silence meant survival, went still. I watched as the admiral scanned the hall, his eyes sharp searching. The band kept playing, but the notes felt distant, like they belonged to another world. Clara's father-in-law paused his speech, glancing at the newcomers, his smile faltering. Patricia, still at the head table, leaned forward, whispering to Tom. Lorraine, near the dance floor, craned her neck, her curiosity plain. I stayed where I was, my heart steady but loud, waiting. The admiral's gaze moved across the room, deliberate, unhurried. I told myself it was nothing, that he was here for someone else, a dignitary, a friend, anyone but me. My life was quiet now, my past buried under years of secrecy and choice. But then his eyes found mine, and they held. It wasn't a glance, not a mistake. It was recognition, the kind that cuts through time and distance. My breath caught, and for a moment I was back, in that other life, standing in a room where my name carried weight, where my presence mattered. He started toward me, his steps steady, the two officers trailing him like shadows. The room noticed now, whispers, rippling eyes following. I felt the weight of their attention, but I didn't look away from him. I couldn't. My hands tightened around my glass, the cold anchoring me. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew it was mine to face. If you're still with me, if this story is pulling you in, please hit that subscribe button. This isn't just about me, it's about the moments when the world sees us for who we truly are. There's more to tell, and I promise it's a truth you won't forget. I sat there, my spine straight, my heart, a signal I couldn't ignore. The admiral was closer now, his face clear in the light-lined, weathered, but resolute. The room was a blur, the music a hum, and all I could think was that the past wasn't as buried as I'd thought. It was here, walking toward me, and I was ready, or as ready as I'd ever be. The chandelier light fractured across the room, but all I could see was the admiral moving toward me. His steps deliberate, his navy uniform, a stark contrast to the soft pastels and glittering dresses around him. My name is Abigail Rose Carter, and I'm telling you this because it's the moment everything changed. The moment the silence I'd carried for years cracked open, letting the truth breathe. At Clara's wedding, I sat at the bar, my hands gripping the edge of my glass, my heart a steady pulse against the chaos of the reception. The world slowed, and I felt it, the weight of eyes, the hush of something coming, something I couldn't outrun. The admiral's presence pulled the room taut, like a string stretched to breaking. Conversations faltered, glasses paused halfway to lips, and even the band seemed to soften their notes, fading into a murmur. He was tall, his face carved with lines that spoke of years at sea, of decisions made in rooms where the air was thick with consequence. The stars on his shoulders gleamed, and the two officers behind him won. A woman, her hair pulled tight. The other, a man with a chest full of ribbons, moved with the same precision, their eyes scanning the crowd. I told myself they weren't here for me. They couldn't be. My life was small now, my past locked away, my name forgotten by everyone except the ghosts I carried. But his eyes held mine, and I knew with the certainty of someone who'd once lived by instinct that I was wrong. I didn't move. My hands stayed on the glass, the cold biting my palms, anchoring me to the present. The room was watching now, their curiosity, a living thing slithering through the crowd. Patricia at the head table leaned forward, her brow creased, her pearls catching the light. Lorraine near the dance floor whispered to the man beside her, her smirk gone replaced by something sharper. Clara's father-in-law, still on the stage, lowered his plaque, his speech forgotten. I felt their gazes heavy and expectant, but I didn't look at them. I looked at the Admiral, at the way his jaw tightened at the faint nod he gave, as if confirming something to himself. He stopped a few feet from the bar, his officers flanking him, and the room went quieter still. The band faltered a violin note hanging unfinished. I felt the weight of every eye, every breath, but I kept my face calm, my spine straight the way I'd been trained to in rooms where hesitation was a luxury I couldn't afford. He looked at me, not through me, not past me, but at me, and his voice, when he spoke, was low resonant, the kind that carried without effort. "Ma'am," he said, and the word landed like a stone in still water. "We've been looking for you." The room froze. I felt it, the collective intake of breath, the sudden stillness, as if the world had tilted and no one knew how to stand. My heart thudded, but I didn't flinch. I'd faced worse than this, moments where a single misstep could have cost lives, where silence was my only defense. But this was different. This wasn't a briefing room or a safe house. This was Clara's wedding, a place where I was nothing, where I'd been erased. And yet here he was, an admiral of the United States Navy, standing before me, his words cutting through the noise like a blade. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came. My throat was tight, my mind racing. I wanted to say, "You've got the wrong person," to laugh it off, to slip back into the shadows where I belonged. But I couldn't lie, not to him, not with those eyes on me, eyes that saw the woman I'd buried long ago. I set my glass down, my movements slow, deliberate, and stood my heels steady on the floor. The bar stool creaked behind me, a small sound in the vast silence. "Sir," I said, my voice quieter than his, but clear the way I'd spoken, in rooms where lives hung on every word. "I think there's been a mistake." He didn't smile, but his eyes softened just enough to tell me he'd expected this. "No mistake, ma'am," he said, and there was something in his tone, respect, certainty, that made my chest ache. He took a step closer, his officers staying back, and lowered his voice, not for secrecy but for me, for the woman he saw standing there. "Abigail Rose Carter, we've been trying to reach you for some time." My name in his mouth was a shock, like hearing a song I'd forgotten. No one had said it like that in years, not with weight, not with reverence. I felt the room shift again, the whispers starting, the questions rising. Patricia's face was pale now, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Lorraine's mouth was open, her eyes darting between me and the Admiral. Clara, still at the head table, looked confused, her smile faltering as she glanced my way. I wanted to look at them, to see their shock, their disbelief, but I couldn't tear my eyes from him. "How did you—" I started, then stopped my training kicking in. Don't ask questions you don't need answered. Don't give anything away. But he saw it, the war in me, the part that wanted to stay hidden, and the part that was tired of hiding. He nodded, as if he understood, and gestured to the woman officer beside him. She stepped forward, holding a small sealed envelope, the kind I'd seen too many times in my other life. Official, unyielding, marked with a seal that meant secrets. "We didn't mean to interrupt," the Admiral said, his voice carrying just enough for the room to hear, "but this couldn't wait." He paused, his eyes searching mine, and I saw it then. A flicker of recognition, not just of my name, but of what it meant, what I'd done. "You've been out of touch, Ms. Carter, but we don't forget our own." Our own. The words hit me like a wave, pulling me under back, to a time when I wasn't alone, when I was part of something bigger, something that saw me. I felt the tears prick my eyes, but I blinked them back, my jaw tight. I wouldn't break, not here, not now. I took the envelope from the woman officer, my fingers steady, though inside I was trembling. It was heavy, the paper, thick, the seal unbroken. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew what it was. A summons, a reminder, a bridge to a life I'd left behind. The room was silent now, the kind of silence that hums with unspoken questions. I felt their eyes, Patricia's, Lorraine's, Clara's, all of them boring into me, trying to unravel what they'd missed. I wanted to turn to them, to say, "You didn't know me, you never did," but I didn't. I looked at the Admiral instead, and something passed between us, a silent understanding, the kind that comes from shared burdens. "Thank you, sir," I said, my voice low but firm. I wanted to say more, to ask why now, why here, but the envelope in my hand was answer enough. He nodded, a small gesture, but it carried weight, the kind of weight that comes from rank, from respect, from knowing what it cost to carry a secret. He turned slightly, addressing the room, now his voice steady but commanding. "Miss Carter has served this country with distinction," he said, and I felt the words land heavy and true. "We're honored to have found her tonight." The room didn't clap. They didn't know how to. They just stared, their faces a mix of shock, confusion, and something else, something that looked like regret. I stood there, the envelope in my hand, the Admiral at my side, and for the first time in years, I felt seen. If you're still with me, if this moment means something to you, please hit that subscribe button. This story isn't just mine. It's for anyone who's ever been underestimated, who's carried a truth no one else could see. There's more to come, and I promise it's a revelation you won't forget. I looked down at the envelope, my thumb brushing the seal, and felt the past rushing toward me, unstoppable. The Admiral was still there, his presence an anchor, but the room was waking up now, the whispers growing, the questions starting. I didn't know what came next, but I knew I couldn't go back. Not to the woman at the bar, not to the silence, not anymore. The envelope in my hand felt heavier than it should, its seal a silent command, pulling me back to a life I'd tried to bury. My name is Abigail Rose Carter, and I'm telling you this because it's the moment the truth broke free, raw and unyielding, in a room that had only ever known my silence. At Clara's wedding, with the Admiral standing before me and the reception hall caught in a stunned hush, I felt the weight of every eye, every whisper, every assumption I'd let fester for years. The chandelier's light burned above, but it was his voice, steady, reverent, that lit the room, exposing me for who I really was. The Admiral turned to face the crowd, his posture rigid, his uniform a symbol of authority no one could ignore. The two officers behind him stood like sentinels, their faces unreadable, their presence amplifying the moment. I wanted to shrink, to slip back into the shadows where I'd lived for so long. But there was no escaping this. Not now. My fingers tightened around the envelope, the paper crinkling faintly, and I stood straighter, my training kicking in. Shoulders back, chin up, eyes forward. I'd faced worse than a room full of shocked relatives, but this wasn't a briefing or a mission. This was my life laid bare in a way I'd never allowed. "Abigail Rose Carter," the Admiral said, his voice carrying across the hall, each syllable deliberate, like a judge reading a verdict. "Commander, United States Navy, retired, codename Sentinel." The words landed like thunder, and the room gasped, a collective sound that sucked the air out of the space. Commander, Sentinel, titles I hadn't heard in years, titles I'd locked away with the oaths I'd taken, the secrets I'd sworn to keep. My heart pounded, but I didn't flinch. I couldn't. Not with him looking at me, not with the room watching, not with the truth finally out. I felt Patricia's stare, sharp and disbelieving from the head table. Lorraine's smirk was gone. Her face pale, her hands frozen mid-gesture. Clara, sweet Clara, looked at me with wide eyes, her lips parted as if seeing me for the first time. I wanted to speak, to downplay it, to say, "It's not what you think." But the Admiral didn't give me the chance. He turned to me, his eyes softening, and said, "Commander Carter, your service was extraordinary. Your country hasn't forgotten." His voice was quieter now, meant for me, but the room heard every word. I felt the tears prick my eyes, but I blinked them back. My jaw tight. I'd spent years hiding this. Hiding her, the woman who'd walked through fire, who'd carried secrets that could have toppled governments. And now she was here, standing in a navy blue dress, in a room that had called her nothing. I shook my head slightly, my voice low. "Sir, I'm retired. That was a long time ago." It was a reflex, a way to deflect, to keep the past where it belonged. But he didn't let it go. He stepped closer, his presence steady grounding. "Time doesn't erase what you did," he said. "Not for us, not for those who know." The room was silent, the kind of silence that hums with shock, with questions no one dared ask. I felt their eyes, family friends, strangers boring into me, trying to reconcile the woman at the bar with the one the Admiral had just named. I wanted to look at them, to see the regret, the confusion, the shame. But I couldn't tear my gaze from him, from the respect in his eyes, the kind I hadn't seen in years. And then I remembered a moment a night, the one that defined me. It was 2003, in a safe house halfway across the world, the air thick with dust and tension. I was 30, a lieutenant commander, then tasked with a mission so classified even my team knew only pieces. We'd intercepted a signal, a fragment of chatter that could have sparked a crisis. I sat at a metal table, my hands steady my mind, racing, piecing together codes while the clock ticked down. The others watched Marines analysts a CIA officer with eyes like knives. When I cracked it, when the message came clear, the room exhaled. A strike was averted, lives were saved, and the Marine across from me, his face scarred and weary, said, "Carter, you're a goddamn miracle." I didn't smile, I didn't need to. I'd done my job, and that was enough. That night came back to me now, vivid and sharp, as I stood in the reception hall. I could still feel the weight of that table, the grit of dust on my fingers, the pulse of purpose in my veins. I'd been Sentinel then, a name whispered in rooms where power lived. I'd walked away from it, chosen silence, chosen safety, but it hadn't walked away from me. The Admiral knew, the envelope in my hand knew, and now the room knew. I looked down at the envelope, my thumb brushing the seal, and felt the past collide with the present. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, meant only for him. He didn't answer, not directly. Instead, he said, "Open it when you're ready. But know this, you're still needed." Needed. The word hit me harder than the titles, harder than the stares. I'd spent years believing I wasn't by my family, by this town, by the world. I'd let their pity, their scorn become my truth. But here was an admiral's stars on his shoulders, telling me I was wrong. I nodded a small gesture, but it felt like a vow. The woman officer stepped forward, her face serious but kind. She handed me a small pin, a silver anchor crossed with a quill insignia I hadn't seen in years, one given only to those who'd served in the shadows. "With respect, Commander," she said and saluted. The man beside her followed their movements, crisp, deliberate. I didn't return the salute, I was retired after all, but I felt it, the honor, the weight. I clutched the pin, its edges sharp, against my palm, and swallowed the lump in my throat. The Admiral turned to the room again, his voice firm. "Commander Carter's work saved lives," he said. "Her sacrifice, her silence protected this nation. You're in the presence of a hero." The word hero felt foreign, too big for the woman I'd become. But it landed and the room shifted. I saw it in their faces, Patricia's hands trembling, Lorraine's eyes downcast, Clara's tears shining. They didn't clap, didn't cheer. They just stared, their world upended, their assumptions shattered. I wanted to feel triumph, to revel in their shock, but all I felt was the weight of the pin in my hand, the envelope in the other, the truth I couldn't escape. I looked at the Admiral, my voice steady now. "Thank you, sir," I said, and meant it. Not for the words, not for the pin, but for seeing me, for pulling me back from the edge of nothing. He nodded, a faint smile breaking through, and I knew he understood. If you're still with me, if this moment resonates, please hit that subscribe button. This isn't just my story, it's for anyone who's been unseen, who's carried a truth too heavy for the world to hold. There's more to come, and I promise it's a reckoning worth hearing. I stood there, the pin and envelope in my hands, the room a blur of faces I no longer recognized. The Admiral stepped back, his officers with him, but their presence lingered a shield against the silence I'd lived in for so long. I didn't know what came next, but But I knew I wasn't the woman at the bar anymore. Not entirely, and that was enough. The reception hall was a sea of stunned faces, their silence louder than the music that had faded into nothing. My name is Abigail Rose Carter, and I'm telling you this because it's the moment the world I'd known. The one built on dismissal and pity crumbled, leaving something new in its place. I stood by the bar, the silver pin sharp in my palm, the sealed envelope heavy in my other hand, its weight pulling me between past and present. The Admiral's words, Commander Sentinel Hero, hung in the air, and I felt them settle into me, not as pride, but as truth raw and unyielding. The room had changed, and so had I. The Admiral stepped back, his officers at his side, their presence a quiet anchor. He didn't speak, again, didn't need to. His nod, brief but deliberate, was enough a signal that this moment was mine to carry. I looked down at the pin, the anchor and quill, glinting under the chandelier's light, and felt the years collapse. The woman I'd been, Lieutenant Commander Carter, codename Sentinel, was no longer a ghost. She was here in this navy blue dress, in this room of people who'd never known her. And they were seeing her now whether they wanted to or not. The crowd stirred a ripple of movement, breaking the silence. Heads turned, whispers grew, but no one dared speak too loudly, as if the weight of the Admiral's words had tethered them to reverence. I felt their eyes, Patricia's, Lorraine's, Clara's, boring into me, each one carrying a different kind of shock. I didn't look at them, not yet. My gaze stayed on the pin, its edges pressing into my skin, grounding me against the tide of emotion, threatening to pull me under. I'd spent years hiding this, letting their assumptions define me, but now the truth was out, and it was heavier than I'd expected. Clara's father-in-law, still on the stage, cleared his throat, his plaque forgotten in his hands. Well, he said, his voice unsteady, "This is unexpected. Let's give a round of applause for Ms. Carter." The room hesitated, then clapped, the sound uneven, almost reluctant, as if they weren't sure what they were clapping for. I didn't acknowledge it. I didn't need their applause. I'd never done it for them. The band started up again, a tentative melody, but the energy of the night had shifted. People moved, some returning to their tables, others lingering, their glances darting my way. I felt the change in the air, the way respect can reshape a room, even if it's born of confusion. A few guests approached the Admiral, their voices low, their questions careful. He answered briefly, his tone clipped, deflecting their curiosity, with the ease of a man used to guarding secrets. I caught fragments, classified, service distinguished, career, national security, but I didn't listen too closely. I didn't need to. I knew what I'd done. Then I saw her, Patricia, moving toward me, her steps hesitant, her face pale. She'd always been the one to command a room, but now she looked small, her pearls dull against her dress. She stopped a few feet away, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes searching mine. "Abby," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "why didn't you tell me?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the sister I'd once loved, the one who'd braided my hair when we were girls, who'd laughed with me until we couldn't breathe. But I also saw the woman who'd called me poor Abby, who'd left me out of toasts, who'd built a life where I was an afterthought. I wanted to be angry, to let the years of hurt spill out, but all I felt was tired. There was nothing to tell. I said, my voice steady but soft, "I did my job, that's all." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough. She flinched, her lips trembling, and I saw the regret in her eyes, the kind that comes too late. "I didn't know," she said, and there was a plea in her voice, a need for absolution I wasn't ready to give. I nodded, a small gesture, and turned away, my fingers closing around the pin. Some wounds don't heal with words. Lorraine was next, her approach, slower, her usual swagger gone. She stood there, her lipstick smudged, her eyes avoiding mine. "Abby, she started, then stopped, her hands twisting together. "I didn't mean back there, I was just—" She trailed off, and I knew what she wanted: forgiveness, a way to erase the venom she'd spat earlier. I looked at her, my face, calm my silence louder than any words I could have said. She'd called me a burden, a nobody, and now she stood before a woman she didn't recognize. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. She backed away, her face flushed, and disappeared into the crowd. Clara came last, her white dress glowing in the dim light, her eyes shining with tears. She didn't say anything at first, just reached for my hand, her fingers warm against mine. "Aunt Abby," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so proud of you." I felt the tears prick again, but I held them back, squeezing her hand gently. "You don't need to be," I said. "Just be happy, Clara. That's enough." She nodded, her tears falling now, and hugged me, her arms tight, like she was afraid I'd vanish. I hugged her back, and for a moment I let myself feel it, the love, the connection, the reason I'd come. The Admiral was still there, speaking quietly with his officers, but he glanced my way, his nod a silent check-in. I nodded back, a gesture of gratitude, of understanding. Then he did something I hadn't expected. He raised his hand in a salute, crisp and formal, the kind reserved for those who've earned it. The woman officer followed, then the man, their movements synchronized their respect, unmistakable. I didn't return the salute, I was retired, and protocol didn't require it, but I felt it deep in my bones. I inclined my head, my hand tightening around the pin, and let the moment seal itself into me. The room watched, and I saw it now, the reverence, the shift from pity to awe. People stood, some slowly, others quickly, as if pulled by the weight of the gesture. They didn't salute, but they rose their faces, a mix of wonder and shame. I didn't want their admiration, didn't need it, but I let it happen, let them see what they'd missed. The band played on, but it was background now, the night belonging to something else, something bigger. I slipped the pin into my purse next to the envelope I still hadn't opened. I wasn't ready to face what was inside, not yet, but I felt its pull, the call of a life I'd thought was gone. I looked at the Admiral one last time, and he gave me a small smile, the kind that says, "You're not alone." Then he and his officers turned their steps, measured, and left the way. They'd come the door, closing softly behind them. The reception resumed, but it was different now. People spoke to me, their voices careful, their questions veiled. I answered politely, deflecting with the ease of someone trained to guard secrets. Clara stayed close, her hand brushing mine, and I felt her love, her pride, like a warmth I hadn't known I needed. Patricia watched from a distance, her face unreadable, and I let her keep her distance. Some bridges take time to rebuild, if they ever do. If you're still with me, if this story is stirring something in you, please hit that subscribe button. This isn't just about me, it's about the moments when the world sees us, really sees us for who we are. There's one more piece to this, and I promise it's a truth worth holding. I stood there, the envelope in my purse, the pin's weight still in my palm, and felt the room settle around me. I wasn't the woman at the bar anymore, not entirely. I was Abigail Rose Carter, Commander Sentinel, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to hide her. The night wasn't over, but I was ready for whatever came next. The reception hall softened into a quieter rhythm, the band playing a gentle waltz that felt like a lullaby for a night that had shattered and reformed. My name is Abigail Rose Carter, and I'm telling you this because it's the end of one story and the beginning of another. A story about finding peace, not in triumph, but in being seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. I stood by the bar, the envelope and pin tucked safely in my purse, their weight a reminder of the woman I'd been and the woman I still was. The room moved around me, but I was steady, my heart no longer racing, my silence no longer a shield, but a choice. The night had changed, and so had I. The Admiral's words, Commander Sentinel Hero, had cracked open the cage I'd built around my past, letting it breathe, letting it live. The faces that had once dismissed me now carried a different look, all regret, curiosity. I felt their eyes, but they didn't wound anymore. I'd spent years letting their pity define me, letting their whispers shape the edges of my life. But now standing in that glittering hall, I knew I didn't need their approval, their apologies, or their shock. I needed only to remember who I was to carry her forward, not as a secret, but as a truth. Clara stayed close, her hand brushing mine as she moved between guests. Her smile brighter now, as if my presence had anchored her in a way I hadn't expected. She didn't ask questions, didn't press for details about the Admiral, or the pin, or the life I'd hidden. She just looked at me, her eyes shining, and said, "Aunt Abby, I'm glad you're here." It was simple, but it was enough. I squeezed her hand, my voice soft. "Me too, Clara." And I meant it. For her I'd come, and for her I'd stay a little longer. Patricia kept her distance, her face a mask of emotions I couldn't untangle, regret, maybe, or shame. She didn't approach again, and I didn't seek her out. The words we needed to say, the wounds we needed to heal would take time if they came at all. Lorraine was nowhere to be seen, her absence a relief, her earlier venom, now just a memory I could let go. The other guests spoke to me in hushed tones. Their questions veiled their respect, tentative. We had no idea. One woman said, her eyes wide, "You must be so proud." I smiled, polite but distant, and said it was my job. They didn't need more, and I didn't owe them more. I slipped away from the bar, my purse in hand, and found a quiet corner near the tall windows overlooking the gardens. The night outside was dark, the stars hidden by clouds, but I could feel them the way I always had, in those years when the sky was my only constant. I leaned against the window, the glass cool against my shoulder, and let myself breathe. The envelope in my purse was still unopened, its contents a mystery I wasn't ready to face. A summons, a recognition, a call back to service I didn't know, and for now I didn't need to. It was enough to know it was there, a bridge to a life I'd thought was gone. I thought about the Admiral, his salute, the way his eyes had seen me. Not the woman at the bar, not poor Abby, but Commander Carter Sentinel, the woman who'd saved lives with her silence. I thought about that night in 2003, in the safe house when I'd cracked the code, and felt the world shift. I'd walked away from that life, chosen a quieter one, but it hadn't left me. It lived in my spine, in the way I carried myself, in the way I'd stood tonight, steady under the weight of a room's disbelief. I didn't need to explain it to anyone. It was mine, and that was enough. The band played on, and I watched the couples on the dance floor, their movements slow, their faces soft with love. I didn't join them, but I didn't feel apart anymore. I was here in this moment, and it was enough. Clara caught my eye from across the room, her smile a beacon, and I smiled back, a real smile, one that reached my eyes. I'd come for her, and I'd found something else myself, the woman I'd buried, the woman I could carry forward. I left the reception, not long after slipping out while the party was still alive, my departure unnoticed by most. The air outside was cool, the parking lot quiet. My Buick waiting like an old friend. I slid into the driver's seat, my purse on the passenger side, the envelope and pin inside. I didn't start the engine right away. I sat there, the silence wrapping around me, and let myself feel it, the peace, the power, the grace of a night that had given me back to myself. When I got home, the house was as I'd left it, the rooms dark, the air still. I set my purse on the kitchen counter and took out the pin, holding it under the light. The anchor and quill gleamed, a small thing, but heavy with meaning. I didn't open the envelope, not yet. I folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer next to the flag I'd been given when I retired, the one I'd never displayed. Some things are too sacred for show. I walked to the window, the night stretching wide outside, and looked at the stars, faint but there. I thought about the woman I'd been, the woman I was, the woman I could still be. And I spoke to you, the one listening, because this is for you as much as it is for me. You don't need to explain your past to anyone. I said, my voice quiet but sure. It lives in your spine, in the way you walk, in the choices you make when no one's watching. Let that be enough. If you're still with me, if this story has touched you, please hit that subscribe button. This isn't just my truth. It's for anyone who's ever felt invisible. who's carried a strength no one else could see. Thank you for listening, for being here. It means more than you know. I turned from the window, my steps light, and walked to my bedroom, the pin still in my hand. I didn't need to display. It didn't need to tell the world what it meant. I placed it on my nightstand next to a photo of Clara as a child, her smile bright, her hand in mine. Then I lay down the house, quiet around me, and closed my eyes. The night had ended, but I was awake, alive, and for the first time in years, I felt whole.